This is Goku Sun DBZ, and welcome to my movie review of Resident Evil. So, with that said, first up, it's been quite a while since I've actually watched the original Resident Evil movie. First thing I want to say about it is that I very much like and enjoy the soundtrack, the music in general. Now, when it comes down to it, if you are not a big fan, musically speaking, of industrial metal or new metal, as it was called, because this film was released in 2001, or actually, no, 2002, my bad. Hard to believe. 18 years old. But yeah, and the actual instrumentals and everything done in it was actually done by a fellow person that was influential in new metal as well as industrial metal. The one who was in charge of composing the music for Resident Evil film, first of all, Marilyn Manson was in charge of the music. And if you're curious to know more, I'm sure you can find here on YouTube like special features on the making of the film and everything. But that is just one of the first things I want to say about the first Resident Evil movie. One of the reasons I love this film so much is, first of all, the atmosphere, the tone, the pacing is all executed very well. And the opening helps get you to understand what things would have been in day to day life working in what's known as the Hive in the first film, which is, of course, controlled by this computer network or brain, if you will, of the Hive, which was all controlled by a supercomputer known as the Red Queen, which was supposed to be based off of the daughter of the one, of course, like head over Umbrella or whatever, when in fact, of course, it ends up being like based on the daughter of the one who created the T virus in the movie, that is. Or rather, in this universe, rather, because in the actual Resident Evil game story, of course, in Resident Evil 2, it was William Birkin who created the T virus, as well as influenced the G virus. Now, in this, they try and make it out to be different. They definitely screw up the mythology and the story aspects from the games, unfortunately. But the first Resident Evil movie, even though there are a few issues here and there, it isn't until really Apocalypse they really screw with everything canon wise or story wise. The first film, as I said, like it opens up good, showing the basic day-to-day life in the Hive and everything from Umbrella Corporation. In the beginning of the film, though, at first they show like advertisements. If you want to say who would be considered like a modern day, a reality version of Umbrella, probably the closest thing to Umbrella in reality would be Microsoft. Microsoft is into technology. They have their hands in, of course, creating military chips, weaponry, as well as they have connections to Pfizer, which is the largest prescription drug company in the world. They have their hands in many different avenues and stuff, very much like Umbrella as a corporation. And so it makes sense. I think in a lot of ways, maybe Umbrella is kind of based off of elements of actually the company Microsoft. Hard to say, you would have to ask the creators of Resident Evil at Capcom, or Biohazard rather. But yeah, the story, the pacing is interesting. You have, of course, it shows characters. Of course, we're introduced to Alice, which is the protagonist of the entire franchise. Which, thank us, they're now rebooting the movies. But Alice was already starting to get overpowered by the second half of this film. At first, she seems just normal, and then she starts doing all kinds of martial arts and stuff, attacking, beating the crap out of zombies, out of the, of course, zombie dogs. Um, which I do appreciate in the film, the zombie dogs, that they use actual practical effects and makeup and stuff on the Doberman Pinschers. rather than going with CG. Given in 2001, 2002 timeframe when the film came out, CG was not at the level as it is, of course, today, film wise and everything. Plus, the first Resident Evil movie was done on a budget of, I believe, like around like 50 million or so dollars. It was a mid-range budget film when it came out. So you have to add on top of that, the only real main CG used in the film, the effects of like people getting sliced into bits early on in the film with the lasers and everything. To be fair, given what they had to work with, actually those effects are not that bad. I don't appreciate the stupid, crappy, cheap jump scares because they really serve nothing. Though I get it, since it's dubbed like a partial horror film, though I dub it as a horror action film because though by the second half of the film it's more or less just action, sadly, with elements of horror, but predominantly action. But as the story progresses, we learn that Alice is going to sell information off about the Umbrella Corporation and everything, and things lead to another. She gains her, of course, memory. As the movie progresses, we have characters such as Max, which, towards the end of the film, ends up getting like a big claw scratch by this giant mutant licker. Or, as for some reason they call it, the Red Queen calls it a hunter. Though it's actually just like a super licker, basically, is what it really is. Or it's a cross between licker and a hunter. But doesn't look like the hunters I remember, which were green in the original Resident Evil and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis video games. But with that said, overall, I think overall, the three acts of the film, even though there are definitely some issues here and there, bad CGI with the liquor, to be honest, not as good as it could have been, but given a mid-range budget and everything they had to work with, they did as good as a job they can, and at least, even though I don't consider it, of course, a super close representation of the original Resident Evil game, because there was no hive or anything, that was more elements introduced in Resident Evil 2 game. But you could tell they took pieces from Resident Evil 2 and other stuff from other Resident Evil, like Resident Evil 3 Nemesis at the end, because Mac's character gets huge claw marks on his shoulder when they're fighting against this thing on the train, which of course now the whole train thing and everything is more based on the ending of the Resident Evil 2 game, which came out like in 97, 98. So time frame kind of makes sense. So yeah, they basically cherry pick stuff from Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, and elements from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. It's because all three of those games were out by the time that came out. Also, if I remember correctly, Resident Evil Code Veronica was also out around that time frame on the Sega Dreamcast. But even though there's definitely a lot of issues I have, as I said, pacing is actually really solid. And even though they very much cherry picked here and there what they used from the games and everything, at least it didn't feel like a slap in the face to those of us who play the original Resident Evil games, and I appreciate that. Frankly, the original Resident Evil movie, I think, is actually a really solid action film with elements of horror, and as an adaptation, it's not great, but it's definitely better than all the future movies would be. Apocalypse Onward. Some people try to defend Apocalypse. You can if you want, but I think it's stupid because Max, the character who gets cut, becomes Nemesis. In the games, that never happens. And also, Alice is, of course, a made-up character for the director of the Resident Evil films, which just so happens to be married to the actress who plays Alice in the films, which understandably makes sense why she's so overpowered in the movies, especially after the first one. Even though she still feels like she jumps. Basically, in RPG terms, she jumps from being like a level 1 RPG character, when she faces like those dogs and stuff, she like all of a sudden jumps up to like level like 100 or something in the snap of a finger. It's kind of ridiculous, honestly. But still, overall, I enjoy the film for what it is, the cheesiness and the over the top cheese ball fest that is Resident Evil 1. But nevertheless, I still enjoy this film. I give Resident Evil 1, the original Resident Evil film, an A minus. Even though I do have a few issues here and there, still, I think the good outweighs the bad with the original Resident Evil film. I definitely thoroughly enjoy it. It is the only Resident Evil film I actually personally own. It's just the original. If I was to rate the others, I might do that sometime in the future. Give my overall opinions on what I would rate each film, maybe, if you all want to hear my opinion on other Resident Evil films. But unfortunately, that means I'd have to rewatch them. Duh. But with that said, yeah, I give the original Resident Evil an A minus. Stay tuned for next week for my review of the original Silent Hill film. And trust me when I say it is pretty much my favorite adaptation, so just be prepared for some bias. And I may do one surprise third horror film for October. If I do, it'll probably begin uploaded right around Halloween. Suitable time, but with that said, I'll see you all next time. Stay safe, have a good Halloween season, and I'll see you again soon enough. And yeah, I had to wear my Resident Evil beanie. But with that said, hope you enjoyed the music in the background. I chose Hisako's theme from, of course, Killer Instinct. Next time I will be using Silent Hill music. So with that said, and yeah, seriously, if you get a chance, check out the music from the Resident Evil. That has some great music by artists like Static X, Marilyn Manson. They have music by Rammstein. They had music in it from also Slipknot and many other greats of the new metal industrial music. With that said, see you soon enough, and I hope you enjoyed this review.